The lobby of a public hospital in Chicago was already crowded when the sliding doors opened that morning. Families clutched paperwork, nurses hurried past with clipboards, and the sound of overhead announcements blended into the hum of 100 different conversations. But near the admitting desk, everything slowed. An elderly man stood there, gripping his chest with one hand, his other holding tightly onto a small leather bag. His daughter tried to explain, but her English faltered. Every word came out tangled, rushed, filled with fear. The clerk behind the desk frowned, leaning closer as if volume alone could solve the problem. "Ma'am, I can't understand you. Please, English, okay?" She tried again, her voice breaking, this time in Spanish. A nurse hovered nearby, glancing at the growing line of patients shifting uncomfortably. Someone muttered that they should just call security if the family refused to cooperate. The old man's breathing grew shallow, his eyes darting between the unfamiliar faces. It wasn't anger that filled the room, it was something colder. The kind of unease that comes when people stop seeing another person as human and start seeing them as a problem. At that moment, a man in grey coveralls pushed his mop bucket quietly along the hallway. His name tag read Noah. He kept his eyes down, the way janitors often do, because in places like this, people rarely look twice at the ones who clean the floors. But Noah's pace slowed. He heard the desperation in the woman's voice, the confusion in the old man's eyes. He had seen this before, how quickly dignity could slip away when language built a wall. He set the mop aside, wiped his hands on a worn rag, and for a moment just stood there, watching. He didn't know why, but his heart told him he couldn't stay silent. Noah had spent years learning how to disappear into the background. People walked past him in hallways without a glance, sometimes even brushing his shoulder as though he wasn't there. He didn't mind. Not anymore. After all, being invisible meant no one asked questions about who he used to be. But as he watched the old man struggling to breathe, something in him stirred. The daughter's eyes darted helplessly from one nurse to the next. Her voice cracked as she tried again in English, stringing together words she barely knew. The nurse shook his head, frustration tightening his jaw. The moment teetered between fear and misunderstanding. Noah took a slow breath. He remembered nights at his kitchen table years ago, helping his own students pronounce words in Spanish class. He remembered the pride in their eyes when they finally got it right. That memory rose up now, uninvited, but clear as day. So he stepped closer. At first, no one noticed, just the quiet sound of his work boots on the linoleum floor. Then a nurse turned, startled. "Sir, this area is restricted, please." But Noah's eyes were steady, not defiant, not timid. He looked at the elderly man, then at his daughter, and finally spoke. His words rolled out in gentle Spanish, calm and familiar, like a bridge being laid between two worlds. The old man's shoulders sagged with relief. His daughter covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. For the first time since stepping into that hospital, they weren't alone in the crowd. And for the first time in years, Noah wasn't invisible. The entire admitting desk seemed to freeze. The nurses blinked, caught off guard by the janitor's fluent Spanish. The old man's breathing slowed, his fingers unclenching from the edge of the counter as Noah translated his symptoms with quiet precision. "He says the pain started in his chest this morning," Noah explained, his voice steady. "And now it's moving down his left arm. He's scared it's his heart." The daughter nodded rapidly, clutching Noah's sleeve in gratitude. The nurse, who had been ready to call security, now straightened, his face flushing with embarrassment. He quickly waved for a wheelchair. "We need to get him to triage right away." People in line had stopped shifting impatiently. Some exchanged glances, surprised, almost guilty. Moments earlier, they had all been whispering about the difficult patient holding things up. Now they watched as the janitor guided the man gently into the chair, speaking to him in a language that sounded like home. Noah's words weren't just translation, they carried warmth, patience, dignity. He bent slightly, meeting the man's eyes, and said softly, "Usted no está solo. Estoy aquí. You're not alone, I'm here." The old man gripped his hand tightly, tears filling his eyes. His daughter whispered through trembling lips, thank you so much." And in that crowded hospital lobby, where Noah had spent years blending into the walls, people finally saw him. When the wheelchair rolled toward the emergency wing, the crowd slowly dispersed. The nervous energy that had hung in the lobby just minutes earlier gave way to hushed conversations. A few people pulled out their phones, whispering to each other about the janitor who had stepped in when no one else could. Noah didn't linger. He picked up his mop again, the handle worn smooth from years of use, and returned to the corner where no one noticed him. That was his place, out of the spotlight, but not everyone was ready to let it go. A young nurse followed him down the hall. She was still holding the chart she had almost dropped in the chaos. "Sir," she called softly, "where did you learn Spanish like that?" Noah paused, wiping his hands on the rag he always kept in his pocket. His expression carried no pride, no desire to impress, just a quiet honesty. "I used to teach," he said. His voice was low, almost apologetic, as though the memory was something fragile. The nurse tilted her head. "You were a teacher?" Noah gave a small nod, then pushed the mop bucket forward. He didn't explain further, and she didn't press. But as he turned the corner, she stood there staring after him, the question echoing in her mind. What kind of teacher ends up cleaning hospital floors? And somewhere deep inside Noah's chest, the same question burned quietly too. By the time Noah clocked out, the sun had slipped low over the city, spilling long shadows across the parking lot. His walk to the bus stop was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavier after the chaos of the morning. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of spaghetti sauce and laundry detergent. It wasn't much. 2 small bedrooms, peeling paint on the kitchen cabinets, but it was theirs. Noah dropped his work bag by the door and called softly, "Lily, I'm home." A pair of small feet padded across the carpet. His daughter appeared, 8 years old, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, pyjamas already on though it was barely evening. She didn't say much, just leaned into his chest for a moment before slipping back to the couch where a half-finished puzzle waited. Noah watched her from the kitchen doorway, his heart aching the way it always did. There had been a time when Lily never stopped talking, singing songs, telling stories, making up jokes that barely made sense. But ever since her mother passed, her words had grown fewer, her silences longer. Some nights she went to bed without saying anything at all. He reheated leftovers, set a plate in front of her, and sat down across the table. The clink of forks filled the room, louder than either of their voices. Noah tried a smile. "You almost finished that puzzle?" Lily shrugged without looking up. Moments like this reminded him why he never answered questions about his past at work. People thought silence meant failure. For him, it was survival. Teaching, music, the life he once knew, all of it had ended the morning a car crash stole his wife. And with her gone, words had lost their meaning. Now it was just him and Lily. 2 people living in the same small space, both learning in their own ways how to breathe through the silence. That evening, after dinner, the apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock and the hum of traffic outside. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her school bag half open beside her. A workbook had slipped out, bright cover, bold letters across the top, Spanish 101. Noah noticed it as he cleared the table. He picked it up, flipping through pages filled with simple exercises, greetings, colours, numbers. Spanish was common in schools across the city, and most kids treated it like any other subject. But for Lily, it carried something heavier. He walked over and knelt beside her. "Need help with this?" he asked softly. She shrugged, eyes glued to the puzzle pieces spread out on the rug. Noah set the workbook between them. On the first page was an assignment. Practice saying hello in Spanish. He smiled faintly. "This one's easy," he said. "Hola, that's it, just hola." Lily's shoulders tightened. She shoved the book away, her small hands shaking. "I don't want to," she burst out, her voice rising. "I don't care about Spanish." The words echoed through the room. Noah froze. It was the first time she had raised her voice in months. Her eyes filled with tears as she turned away, hugging her knees to her chest. He knew then, it wasn't the language she hated, it was the memories tied to it. The bedtime lullabies her mother used to hum, the words that now felt like reminders of loss. Noah sat down on the carpet beside her. He didn't push the book back. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder and stayed there, silent but steady. For a long time, they sat together in that heavy quiet. And in the dim light of the apartment, Noah understood. His daughter wasn't rejecting the language itself. She was rejecting the pain that came with it. The next morning at the hospital, Noah pushed his cart down the polished hallway, head bent as usual. To him, it was just another day, mopping floors, emptying trash, moving quietly around people who barely noticed he was there. But not everyone had forgotten what happened in the lobby. A young man in scrubs approached him, phone in hand. "Hey, you're the guy from the video, right?" Noah frowned, not understanding. The man turned the screen toward him. A shaky clip played, the old man clutching his chest, the chaos at the desk, and then Noah stepping forward, speaking calm Spanish that silenced the room. It had been filmed from the corner of the lobby. At the bottom of the screen, words were scrawled across the clip. "The janitor who saved my grandfather." Underneath, the number of views ticked upward so fast it looked unreal. Noah felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't even known anyone was recording. By lunchtime, whispers followed him through the halls. Patients' families glanced twice, some offering small smiles of recognition. A nurse held the elevator door longer than necessary just to thank him. But Noah didn't bask in it. Instead, he felt a familiar unease rising in his chest. Attention wasn't what he wanted. For years, he had built his life around the opposite, staying unseen, keeping his world simple, small, safe. That evening, back in the apartment, Lily was curled up on the couch, watching cartoons. Noah set his phone on the table and rubbed his temples. A notification pinged, then another and another. Messages from people he hadn't heard from in years, articles being shared online. He looked at his daughter, wondering if she would see it, wondering if she'd recognise the man in that clip as her father. For the first time in a long time, Noah felt the quiet life he had carved out beginning to crack. By the end of the week, the video had spread far beyond the hospital walls. It was on Facebook, on Twitter, even on the local news. Strangers were leaving comments like, "This is what humanity looks like," and "Hire more people like him." Inside the hospital, though, the mood was complicated. In the break room, 2 nurses scrolled through their phones, whispering. One of them shook her head. They should be proud of him. That man probably saved a life. The other bit her lip. Management doesn't see it that way. Word is he acted outside his role. That afternoon, a notice appeared on the bulletin board near the staff lockers. The paper was thin, printed in black and white, but its message was sharp. Employee Noah Whitaker will be formally reviewed for exceeding his duties during work hours. When Noah saw it, he didn't flinch. He just stood there, rag still in his hand, as if the words were meant for someone else. A few co-workers exchanged uneasy looks. One tore the notice down, muttering, "Ridiculous. The man helps a patient and they punish him for it." Noah didn't respond. He picked up his bucket and headed back to the corridor. The mop swished softly against the tiles, steady, unhurried. It was the rhythm he knew, the rhythm that kept him from thinking too hard about the life he had left behind. But that evening, when he sat on the worn bench behind the hospital, the weight of it pressed heavier than usual. The bench overlooked the employee parking lot, where doctors in crisp coats and nurses in scrubs walked to their cars, heading home to families who would ask about their day. Noah just stared at his hands, calloused from years of work that left no trace once the floor dried. He wasn't angry, he wasn't even surprised. He was simply tired of being reminded that in places like this, kindness could be seen as crossing a line. And yet, as his phone buzzed again with another notification, he couldn't help but wonder if the world outside these walls saw something different. By Monday morning, the hospital's front desk had turned into something no one expected. A stack of handwritten letters sat beside the sign-in sheets, all addressed to one man. Some were from patients, others from families, even a few from strangers who had seen the video online. One note read, "My mother was a housekeeper for 30 years. People like Noah are the reason hospitals even function. Don't punish him, thank him." Another was signed by a college student. "I saw myself in him. Quiet, overlooked. Thank you for showing me kindness matters more than titles." Soon, a petition appeared online. Within 24 hours, it had thousands of signatures. Headlines began circling, hospital janitor suspended after saving patient. Inside the cafeteria, employees scrolled through the stories, shaking their heads. Some smiled quietly when Noah walked past. Others clapped him on the back and muttered, "We've got your back." Noah didn't answer. He just offered a small nod, carrying his tray to the corner table he always chose, the one facing the window. But when he sat down, he found a folded piece of paper waiting on the tray. It was a sketch drawn in pencil of him kneeling beside the old man in the lobby, hand on the patient's shoulder. At the bottom, written in a shaky scrawl, "Gracias." Noah held the paper for a long moment. His throat tightened, though no words came. That night, back in the apartment, Lily noticed the drawing sticking out of his pocket. She pulled it free and studied it under the lamp. For the first time in weeks, she looked up at her father with something other than silence. "Is this you?" she asked softly. Noah hesitated, then nodded. Lily didn't smile. She didn't say more. But she slipped the drawing onto the fridge, pinning it with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. And that simple act said what she couldn't yet find words for. She was proud. By midweek, the hospital could no longer ignore it. Local reporters gathered outside the main entrance, cameras perched on tripods, waiting for a statement. Patients on gurneys were wheeled past them, families shielding their eyes from the flash of cameras. It wasn't the kind of attention the administration wanted. Inside, a meeting dragged on in the conference room. Administrators argued about policy and liability. Words like protocol and chain of command filled the air, but every few minutes someone's phone buzzed with another headline, another wave of comments flooding in. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, something else was happening. Families who had seen the video began approaching the front desk, asking quietly, "Is Noah here today?" Some left small gifts, a thermos of coffee, a bag of donuts, a handwritten card tucked under the counter. One woman pressed a bouquet of wildflowers into a nurse's hands with a firm request. "Please give this to the janitor who spoke up." Even employees who had stayed silent began to shift. A young doctor, still in his white coat, stepped forward when a reporter asked for comment. "All I'll say is this. Without Noah, that man might not be alive today. That matters more than any job title." The quote hit the evening news. By the next morning, the petition had doubled in size. People weren't just calling for Noah's suspension to be lifted. They were demanding the hospital recognise him publicly. In his small apartment, Noah sat at the kitchen table with the news flickering on the TV. Lily was across from him, colouring in a notebook. She looked up when she heard his name on the screen. "They're talking about you again," she whispered. Noah rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. He had never wanted this kind of spotlight. But when Lily slid her drawing across the table, a picture of him standing tall beside the old man in the hospital lobby, he realised it wasn't just about him anymore. To his daughter, and to so many strangers, he had already become something more than a janitor. He had become proof that being seen, even once, could change everything. That night, the apartment was unusually still. The television hummed softly in the background, replaying clips of the hospital lobby over and over. Noah tried to focus on washing dishes, but his thoughts felt heavier than the plates in his hands. From the couch, Lily watched the screen. She had seen the video before. People had shown it at school, whispering about the janitor who spoke Spanish like a teacher. But tonight she saw it differently. She saw the way her father bent down to meet the old man's eyes, the steady calm in his voice, the way strangers in the lobby finally noticed him. "Dad," her voice was small, hesitant. Noah set the dish towel down. "Yes, sweetheart?" She bit her lip, then slid off the couch and held the remote out to him. The video was paused on the moment his hand rested on the old man's shoulder. "That was you," she said, almost in awe. "You did that." Noah swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He nodded once, keeping his voice even. "Yeah, that was me." For a moment, she just stared at the frozen image on the screen. Then something broke through the shell she had been hiding behind for so long. A small, unguarded smile spread across her face. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. The words were shaky, like they'd been waiting years to find their way out. Noah felt the breath catch in his chest. He hadn't heard those words since his wife was alive. His hands trembled, not from weakness but from the sudden weight of hope. He pulled Lily close, and for the first time in a long while, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt full of something healing, fragile, and real. By the end of the week, the hospital could no longer stay silent. Reporters crowded the front steps, cameras flashing as administrators shuffled nervously through the glass doors. A press conference was announced, something to calm the storm, something to repair the hospital's image. Noah was asked to attend. He stood backstage in his grey uniform, mop bucket set aside, feeling like he had wandered into a world that wasn't his. Lily sat in the front row beside a nurse who had offered to watch her. Her legs dangled off the chair, sneakers swinging nervously. When the director of the hospital took the podium, his words sounded polished, rehearsed. "We value all of our employees. We recognise the importance of compassion in healthcare." The audience clapped politely, but the faces in the crowd were restless. Everyone knew why they had come. Finally, the director gestured for Noah. A hush fell as he stepped forward, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded in front of him. He had never spoken into a microphone before. "I don't really have a speech," he began, voice low but steady. "I didn't step in that day because I wanted attention. I did it because a man was scared and needed someone to understand him." He paused, eyes scanning the room, then found Lily in the front row. She was leaning forward, watching him with a focus he hadn't seen in years. "I've made mistakes in my life," Noah continued. "I've lost things I can't get back. But if there's one thing I know, it's this. Kindness should never be treated like it breaks the rules." The silence that followed was thick, not empty, heavy with meaning. And then the applause came. Not polite this time, but rising, swelling, breaking like a wave against the walls of the auditorium. Noah stepped back, overwhelmed. As he left the stage, Lily ran to him, arms wrapping around his waist. He bent down, resting his forehead against hers. "You did good, Dad," she whispered. For the first time in years, Noah allowed himself to believe it. In the days after the press conference, the hospital began to change in small but noticeable ways. Near the main entrance, a sign appeared in bold letters. "Language access, volunteers wanted." Staff members who spoke Spanish, Polish, Tagalog, and dozens of other languages signed their names, eager to be part of something bigger than their job descriptions. Noah never added his own. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. One afternoon, as he pushed his cart past the paediatric ward, a woman in scrubs hurried out to stop him. She held the hand of a little boy no older than 6. The boy's hair was messy from days in bed, his cheeks pale. The woman bent down to whisper in his ear, then nudged him forward. With shy eyes, the boy handed Noah a folded card. On the front, drawn in bright crayon, was a picture of a man holding a mop like a staff, standing tall beside a smiling grandfather. Inside, in block letters, it said, "Thank you for listening." Noah's throat tightened. He knelt so he could meet the boy's eyes. "De nada," he whispered gently, and the boy grinned. Later that evening, as he sat on the familiar bench behind the hospital, a nurse from night shift approached. She carried 2 cups of coffee and set one beside him. "My dad was a janitor," she said quietly. "He used to say the world only notices you when you stop cleaning. But today, the world noticed you for the right reason." Noah didn't know how to answer. He just nodded, fingers wrapped around the warm paper cup. Back home, Lily found the crayon card sticking out of his bag. She read the words slowly, lips forming each one. Then she placed it on the fridge right next to the sunflower sketch. 2 drawings, 2 reminders. And for Noah, the first hint of something he hadn't felt in years, hope that maybe his silence hadn't been wasted after all. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Noah found Lily at the kitchen table, her hair tangled from sleep, a pencil gripped tightly in her hand. She was hunched over her notebook, tongue pressed to the corner of her lip in concentration. When she noticed him watching, she slid the notebook across the table without a word. On the page, in uneven letters, was a single phrase, "Holla, Dad, la." Noah blinked, his throat closing before he could speak. "I looked it up," Lily whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. "I wanted to try." For weeks she had refused, shutting the workbook, tearing pages, turning away from the language that reminded her too much of the mother she lost. And now here it was again, not as a reminder of pain, but as a bridge. Noah sat down slowly, pulling the pencil from her hand. He wrote the next word, simple and steady, gracias. Then he slid the notebook back. Lily's smile was small, almost shy, but it was real. She copied the letters carefully, then said it aloud, gracias. The sound filled the tiny kitchen, brighter than any music. Noah reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You don't have to rush, he told her. One word at a time is enough. But for him, it wasn't just a word. It was proof that the wall of silence between them was starting to crack, letting light through. Lily leaned forward, resting her head against his arm, her voice muffled but certain. I missed talking to you. And in that moment, Noah realised he hadn't just found his voice again in the world. He was helping his daughter find hers too. A few weeks later, Noah walked Lily to a community centre just a few blocks from their apartment. The old brick building smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax, the kind of place that had seen decades of neighbourhood meetings and after-school programmes. Tonight, a small Spanish class was gathered inside, folding chairs set up in a circle. Lily clutched his hand a little tighter as they stepped in. She wasn't used to groups, to speaking out loud in front of strangers. But when the teacher smiled and asked everyone to introduce themselves, Lily glanced up at her father, then took a shaky breath. She stood, voice trembling at first, but steadying with each word. Hola, she said, looking right at Noah. Soy Lily. Then after a pause she added softly, Gracias, Dad. The room clapped, just a ripple of encouragement, but Noah's eyes stung. He bit back the rush of emotion, because in that moment his daughter wasn't just repeating words from a book. She was choosing to speak again, to let the world hear her. After class, they walked home under the streetlights, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She skipped once, twice, the way she used to before everything changed. Noah carried nothing but the folded worksheet she had pressed into his pocket. On it, in big, uneven letters, she had written the phrase they'd practiced together. You are not alone. At home, she pinned it to the fridge beside the sunflower sketch and the crayon drawing. 3 simple papers, side by side, telling the story of where they had been and where they were going. Noah stood back, arm resting around his daughter's shoulders. The silence in their apartment no longer felt heavy. It felt like space, room for new words, new laughter, new life. And as Lily leaned against him, whispering goodnight in the language that had once felt too painful to touch, Noah finally understood. Sometimes healing doesn't come with speeches or headlines. Sometimes it begins with the quiet courage to say one small word out loud, and to know someone is listening. Lesson: true kindness doesn't need a title or recognition. Listening with compassion can break down walls, heal silence, and remind us that every voice, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and your presence here. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel to support more stories like this. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.